The moment I understood what was happening, I was standing in the middle of Charles de Gaulle Airport, Terminal 2E, watching my mother's back as she walked away from me. My father was beside her. My sister Claire trailed 2 steps behind, pulling her carry-on over the polished floor without looking back. And I was standing there, 38 years old, a grown woman who had paid for this entire trip with no phone, no passport, and no way home. They had taken everything to handle the documents, my mother had said. "You're too stressed to keep track of anything right now. Let us help." If you've ever been betrayed by people who were supposed to protect you, tell me where you're watching from, because what I'm about to share isn't about revenge. It's about the quiet, painful process of becoming someone your own family can't destroy. Let me go back 15 minutes. We had just cleared security after a week in Paris, a trip I had hoped would mend what my divorce had broken between us. My marriage to Daniel had ended 11 months before, and in the aftermath, I had retreated. I hadn't answered calls as quickly as my mother expected. I hadn't attended my niece's birthday party. I hadn't explained myself to anyone because, frankly, I didn't have the words yet. So when Claire suggested a family trip, something to reconnect, I agreed. I booked the flights, I reserved the hotel, I used points I'd been saving for 3 years to upgrade us to a suite with a view of the Seine. I thought generosity might bridge the distance I'd created. I was wrong. The first sign came on day 2 at breakfast when my father asked about the Manhattan condo. My grandmother, his mother, had left it to me in her will. Not to him, not split among the family, but to me specifically. She had written a letter explaining why, though I'd never shared its contents with anyone. The condo was mine, fully paid off, worth, according to recent estimates, just under $2 million. "You're not even using it properly," my father said over his croissant. "You're living in one room like a student. Your mother and I could manage the property, rent it out, make it work for the family." I said no. I said it politely. I explained that I was considering starting a business and might use the space as a home office eventually. I thanked him for his concern. I tried to change the subject. But the subject didn't change. For the next 5 days, every meal included some variation of the same conversation. My mother reminded me how much they had sacrificed raising me. Claire pointed out that I had no dependents while she had 2 children and a husband who'd recently been laid off. My father asked, more than once, whether I really understood how to handle that kind of asset. By the last morning, I was exhausted. I wanted only to get to the airport, get on the plane, and get home to my quiet condo where no one would question my right to exist inside my own life. We arrived at Charles de Gaulle with 90 minutes to spare. I handed my mother my phone when she asked to borrow it for a quick search. I gave my father my passport when he offered to keep all the documents together in his carry-on. I didn't think about it. They were my family. Then, standing near the departure board, my father turned to me and said, "We need to talk about your behavior." My behavior? This entire trip, you've been hostile, secretive, uncooperative. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. That was the most disorienting thing about my father. His cruelty always arrived in measured tones, like a newsreader delivering casualty statistics. "I'm not hostile. I've just said no to something you want. That's different." Claire stepped forward. "Joyce, we're worried about you. You've been erratic since the divorce. The emails you've sent? What emails? The ones where you said you couldn't cope, where you talked about not knowing what to do next. Mom has them saved. If you can't see how concerning that is, then maybe we need to step in." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Step in how? My mother finally spoke. Her voice was soft, almost kind. "Sweetheart, we're not trying to hurt you, but you're clearly struggling. You've isolated yourself, you're clinging to that condo like it's some kind of lifeline, instead of letting people who understand these things help you. We think, your father and I, that you might not be in a position to make major decisions right now." I stared at her. "What are you talking about?" "We've consulted with an attorney." My father said it like he was reading from a prepared statement. "If you are unwilling to cooperate, we may need to explore legal avenues for your own protection." Legal avenues? I repeated the words slowly, trying to make them mean something other than what I suspected. Conservatorship, Claire said, finally using the real word. A guardianship, just until you're stable again. I reached for my phone. My mother's hand moved to her purse. I need my phone back. You're upset. We'll hold on to it until you've calmed down. And my passport. Joyce, my father's tone sharpened slightly, we're not doing this in public. You can collect your things when you're ready to have a rational conversation. Give me my passport. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he turned and began walking toward the security queue. Your ticket's been canceled, Claire said quietly, almost apologetically. Mom did it this morning. You need to stay here and think. We'll be in touch when we land. I grabbed her arm. Claire, this isn't. You can't just. You're hurting me. I wasn't. I had barely touched her sleeve, but her voice rose just enough to attract attention, a security officer glancing in our direction, a man pausing mid-stride to stare. Claire stepped back, pulling free with exaggerated effort. This is what we're talking about, Joyce. You can't control yourself. And then she was gone too, walking toward security with my parents, disappearing into the crowd. I stood there. I don't know how long. The departure board flickered. Announcements echoed in French, then English, then French again. Travelers streamed around me like water around a stone, and I stood there with nothing. No identification, no phone, no ticket, no way to prove who I was or where I was supposed to be going. I had 12 euros in the pocket of my cardigan, a credit card in my coat, and the slowly dawning understanding that the people who had raised me had just left me stranded in a foreign country as part of a calculated plan to take control of my life. I found a seat near a charging station and sat down. My hands were shaking, but I pressed them flat against my thighs and breathed. Panic wouldn't help. I had to think. The embassy. I would need to contact the U.S. Embassy in Paris. They could issue an emergency passport. I knew that much from a colleague who'd lost hers in Rome years ago. It would take time, possibly days, and I would need to prove my identity somehow. I had no documents, but I had my face. I had my voice. I had a credit card with my name on it. I stood up and walked toward the information desk. The woman behind the counter was professionally polite, the particular kind of politeness that masks impatience. I explained my situation in the calmest voice I could manage. She directed me to the police auxiliary station on the lower level. There, I waited for 47 minutes before speaking to an officer who seemed unconvinced by my story. A woman whose family had abandoned her at the airport, whose own mother had canceled her ticket. It sounded, from his expression, like a domestic matter, a misunderstanding. Perhaps I should call someone. I had no one to call. I gave him my credit card. He wrote down the name, but explained that it wasn't identification. I asked about emergency services for stranded travelers. He suggested I contact the embassy first thing in the morning, they were closed now, and in the meantime, perhaps find a hotel. I walked out of the station without thanking him. I'm not proud of that, but I had nothing left for pleasantries. The airport hotel was 230 euros for the night. I handed over my credit card, signed the receipt, and walked to my room, a narrow space with a window overlooking the parking garage. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall for what might have been an hour. Then I started to make a plan. The embassy would open at 8:30. I would be there at 7 to wait. I would need to explain what had happened, though the truth sounded implausible even to me. I would need them to believe me, to verify my identity through whatever databases they had access to issue me an emergency travel document. And then I would need to get home and figure out what my family was actually doing with that attorney they'd mentioned. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I lay on top of the covers with my coat wrapped around me and watched the ceiling until the gray light of morning began to seep through the curtains. By 6:15, I was dressed and walking toward the airport shuttle. I had no other clothes. My suitcase had been checked through to New York, so I wore the same blouse and trousers I'd traveled in, smoothing them with my hands in the airport bathroom, as if that might make any difference. The U.S. Embassy was in the 8th arrondissement, near the Champs-Élysées. I took the RER from the airport, standing the whole way because I didn't trust myself to sit down. If I sat, I might not get back up. I arrived at 7:40 and joined the line already forming outside the consular section. The people around me were mostly tourists, lost passports, stolen wallets, the ordinary emergencies of travel. I envied them their ordinary emergencies. When the doors opened, I was fifth in line. I took a number, I waited. I rehearsed my explanations silently, trying to make it sound reasonable, trying to make it sound like something that could actually happen to a real person. The consular officer who finally called my number was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain. She listened to my story with her head tilted slightly to one side, making notes on a yellow pad. "And your family took your passport? Deliberately?" "Yes." "Do you have any documentation at all? Driver's license, birth certificate?" "No. Everything was in my bag, and my father had my bag." She was quiet for a moment. "This is unusual," she said. "I know. Is there anyone in the States who could verify your identity? Fax us documents?" I thought about it. My ex-husband Daniel could confirm who I was, but asking him for help felt like surrendering something I couldn't maim. My employer, I'd worked as an administrative coordinator for a small events company before the divorce, might have my records, but I'd left that job 3 months ago. "I have a bank," I said, "accounts in my name. The credit card company can verify my signature." The officer nodded slowly. "We'll need to do a full verification. It could take 3 to 5 business days." "I don't have anywhere to stay for 3 to 5 days." "There are assistance programs for stranded citizens, limited funds. I can give you the information." She slid a brochure across the counter. "Emergency assistance for U.S. citizens abroad." I took it. My hands were steady, but only because I was concentrating on keeping them that way. "Thank you," I said. I walked out of the embassy into the thin Paris sunlight and sat down on a bench near a bus stop. The brochure explained that I might qualify for a repatriation loan, enough to buy a one-way ticket home, but that I would need to repay it within a specific time frame, and that my passport would be flagged until I did. My family had taken my documents to strand me, and now the process of getting home would leave a mark on my record, a small note in some government file that I had once needed emergency assistance. I wondered if that was intentional too, if they were building a case, brick by brick, to prove I couldn't manage my own affairs. The thought made my stomach turn. I looked up and saw, across the street, a cafe with small tables set outside. People were drinking coffee, reading newspapers, living their ordinary mornings. I had 13 euros left, enough for a coffee and maybe a croissant. I stood up and crossed the street because I didn't know what else to do. The cafe was called Les Petits Cluny. I remember the name because I stared at the awning for a long time before going inside, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into instructions for what to do next. I ordered a café crème and sat at a table near the window. The coffee came in a wide white cup, and I wrapped my hands around it even though I wasn't cold. I was shaking again, faintly, a tremor I couldn't control. I had no phone, no way to contact anyone, no way to know what was happening in New York, whether my family had already begun whatever legal process they were threatening. And I couldn't stop replaying Claire's words, the emails where you said you couldn't cope. She wasn't lying, not entirely. After Daniel left, I had written to my mother 3 or 4 times about how difficult things were, how I wasn't sleeping, how I didn't know what my life was supposed to look like anymore. I had thought I was confiding in someone who cared. Instead, I had been handing her evidence. The realization sat in my chest like a stone. I spent that day walking. I couldn't afford to do much else. I returned to the embassy in the afternoon to check on my case, no updates. And then I walked along the Seine, across the Pont des Arts, through the Tuileries. I watched tourists taking photographs. I watched couples holding hands. I watched children running ahead of their parents, and I thought about how different everything looked when you had nowhere to be. By evening, I had found a hostel that would accept my credit card without a passport. It was clean enough, a shared room with 3 other women, German students on holiday, who ignored me politely. I lay in my narrow bunk and listened to them whispering in the dark, their laughter soft and careless. I didn't belong here. I didn't belong anywhere. The second day was harder. I returned to the embassy. My verification was in progress. They were waiting on confirmation from the Social Security Administration. These things took time. I asked about the repatriation loan. The process required additional paperwork. I would need to demonstrate financial hardship, which was complicated by the fact that I had a credit card that worked and a bank account with sufficient funds. I wasn't technically destitute, just stranded. The system wasn't designed for situations like this, the officer admitted. She looked genuinely sympathetic, which somehow made it worse. I walked back to the hostel and sat on my bunk with my coat over my shoulders. The German students had checked out that morning. The room was empty except for me. I thought about calling Daniel, about using the hostel's landline to reach someone, anyone who might help. But what would I say? My family abandoned me at an airport because I wouldn't give them control of my apartment? It sounded paranoid. It sounded like the kind of thing an unstable person would believe. Maybe that was the point. On the third morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't expected. I was not unstable. I was not irrational. I was a competent adult who had been deliberately placed in an impossible situation by people who wanted something I owned. And I was going to find a way out of it. I got dressed. I washed my face in the shared bathroom. I walked to the embassy and asked politely but firmly to speak with someone senior about expediting my case. The officer I'd been working with disappeared for 20 minutes. When she came back, she was accompanied by a man in a dark suit who introduced himself as a consular supervisor. He listened to my story again. He asked questions, detailed questions about my family, my property, the threats that had been made. He made notes. "This sounds like a civil matter," he said eventually, "a family dispute. We can help you get home, but what happens after that is outside our jurisdiction." "I understand. I just need to get home." He nodded. "I'm going to prioritize your verification. You should have your emergency passport by tomorrow afternoon." Tomorrow afternoon, 36 hours earlier than the original estimate. It wasn't a miracle, it was bureaucracy bending slightly in my favor, but it felt like something. "Thank you," I said. "When you get back to the States," he added, "you should consult with an attorney, a good one. What you're describing, if your family follows through, could become very complicated." "I know." I left the embassy and walked without direction, ending up somehow at the Gare du Nord. The station was crowded with travelers, business people with rolling briefcases, tourists with oversized backpacks, families with small children clinging to their parents' hands. I sat on a bench near Platform 7 and watched the departures board. London, Brussels, Amsterdam, Cologne. All these places I could go if I had a passport, all these lives unfolding in parallel to mine. And then I noticed the woman. She was sitting on the floor near the ticket machines, young, maybe 22 or 23, with dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was crying silently, her shoulders shaking, her face turned toward the wall as if hoping no one would see. I hesitated. I had 13 euros. I had no phone, no way home, no certainty about anything. I was in no position to help anyone, but I stood up anyway. The woman's name was Ines. She was Tunisian French, traveling to visit her grandmother in Lyon, and someone had stolen her wallet from her bag while she was buying a sandwich. "My ticket was in there," she said, her voice thick with tears. "My ID, everything." I sat down beside her on the cold floor. "Have you reported it to the police?" "They said they can't do anything. It's just gone." I looked at her, really looked. She was wearing a thin jacket and worn sneakers. Her bag was patched in 2 places. She didn't have a credit card to fall back on. She didn't have a hostel to return to. I had 13 euros. It wouldn't buy her a ticket to Lyon, it wouldn't replace her documents, it wouldn't solve her problem, but it would buy her a meal, maybe a night in the cheapest hostel I'd found, a few hours of warmth and safety while she figured out what to do next. I reached into my pocket. "Here," I said, pressing the bills into her hand. "It's not much, but there's a hostel on Rue de Dunkirk, the Auberge de la Jeunesse. They take cash, and they're not expensive." She looked at the money, then at me. "I can't take this." "You can." "But what about you?" I almost laughed. "I'll be fine. I have a credit card." It was true and not true at the same time. I had a credit card that was slowly accruing charges I would need to pay back. I had nothing else. But I had more than she did. Ines stared at me for a long moment. Then she reached out and squeezed my hand. Just once, briefly, before tucking the money into her pocket. "Thank you," she said. "I don't even know your name." "Joyce." "Thank you, Joyce." She stood up, shouldered her bag, and walked toward the exit. She didn't look back. I didn't expect her to. I sat on the cold floor of the Gare du Nord with nothing left to my name except a credit card and a coat, and I felt, for the first time since the airport, like myself again. That night I skipped dinner. I had no money and no appetite anyway. I returned to the hostel and lay in my empty room, listening to the sounds of the city through the thin window. Tomorrow I would have my emergency passport. Tomorrow I would figure out how to get a ticket home. Tomorrow the real fight would begin. But for now, I let myself rest. My emergency passport arrived at 2:15 the following afternoon, a thin blue booklet with "limited validity" stamped across the front. I held it like a talisman, proof that I existed, that I was real. Now I needed a flight. I walked back to Charles de Gaulle, taking the RER again, standing again, watching the suburbs scroll past the windows, and approached the first airline counter I found. The next available seat to New York was on an Air France flight leaving at 9:30 that evening. The price was 1,400 euros. I handed over my credit card and tried not to think about the number. I had 6 hours to kill. I found a seat near my gate and sat down with my small bag, the same bag I'd been carrying for 4 days now, containing nothing but my empty wallet, my credit card, and the brochure from the embassy. I watched travelers come and go. I watched planes taxi across the tarmac. I waited. At 7:15, a man sat down 2 seats away from me. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair graying at the temples, and the kind of suit that doesn't wrinkle even after a transatlantic flight. He was reading something on a tablet, frowning slightly, occasionally making notes with a stylus. I didn't pay much attention, I was too tired to be curious about strangers. But then his phone rang, and his conversation pulled me from my thoughts. "No," he said, "tell Nathan I'm not interested in discussing this again. The Foundation Gala is my decision, and I'm not changing the venue because it makes him uncomfortable." A pause. "I don't care what the board thinks. Elaine would have wanted—" Another pause, longer this time. His jaw tightened. "Don't bring her into it. Not like that." He ended the call without saying goodbye, and sat for a moment, staring at nothing. I should have looked away, should have returned to my own thoughts, but something in his expression, the controlled grief, the exhaustion beneath the anger, felt familiar. He caught me looking. "I'm sorry," I said. "I wasn't trying to—" "It's fine." His voice was clipped, but not unkind. Public space, public conversation. We sat in silence for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, he turned toward me. "You've been sitting here for hours," he said. "I noticed when I passed through earlier. Same seat, same bag, no phone." "My phone was taken." "Stolen?" I hesitated. "Something like that." He studied me with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but wasn't. "You're American, but you're not flying with the group tour that came through this morning. You're not with the business travelers. You're alone. Is that unusual?" "Not necessarily, but you look like someone who's been through something." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I said nothing. He leaned back in his seat, his expression shifting, calculating now rather than curious. "My name is Alexander Hayes. I run a development company in New York. I'm on my way back from a property negotiation that didn't go the way I'd hoped." I recognized the name, Hayes Development, high-end real estate, the kind of company whose projects ended up in architectural magazines. "Joyce Romero," I said. "What happened to you, Joyce Romero?" I shouldn't have told him. I had no reason to trust a stranger in an airport, no matter how well-tailored his suit or how recognizable his name. But I was exhausted. 4 days of isolation, 4 days of holding everything inside, and the story came out before I could stop it. Not all of it, not the details about the condo or the conservatorship threat, but enough. The airport, my family walking away, the days of limbo. When I finished, Alexander Hayes was quiet for a long moment. "That's quite a story," he said finally. "I know how it sounds. It sounds like your family tried to strand you in a foreign country to gain leverage over something you own. Is that accurate?" I blinked. "Yes, that's exactly accurate. And you're going back to New York to fight them." "I'm going back to New York because it's where I live. The fighting is, I don't know yet." He nodded slowly. Then he looked at his tablet, at the time displayed in the corner, at the gate number above our heads. "I have a proposal for you, one that might benefit us both." He explained it over the next 45 minutes, while I listened with growing disbelief. His wife Elaine had died 18 months ago, ovarian cancer. They had been married for 12 years, and he'd spent the last year and a half alternately grieving and fending off attempts by his brother Nathan to use that grief against him. "Nathan wants control of the company," Alexander said. "He's been building a case, quietly, that I'm too unstable to lead, that my judgment is compromised. He's using the Foundation Gala as a test." "What kind of test?" "The Elaine Hayes Foundation Gala is our biggest annual event. Major donors, city officials, press coverage. Last year, I didn't attend. I couldn't. This year, Nathan's been telling people I won't be able to handle it, that I'll break down, embarrass the company, prove that I'm unfit." "Will you?" His jaw tightened. "No, but it would help to have someone beside me, someone who could deflect attention, provide stability, someone who could play the role of—" He stopped, reconsidering his words. "Someone who could appear to be a partner." I understood then. "You want me to pretend to be your wife. I want you to pretend to be someone important to me, someone I'm considering a future with, someone who makes me seem grounded. And in exchange? In exchange, I get you out of Paris tonight on my plane. I provide housing when we arrive in New York. I have a guest apartment that's sitting empty. I give you a new phone, temporary resources, and payment for your time at the gala. And if you need legal help, which based on your story you will, I introduce you to the best attorney I know." I stared at him. "Why me?" "Because you're here. Because you're clearly intelligent and composed. Because you have your own reasons to want stability in New York, which means you won't disappear when things get difficult." He paused. "And because you're looking at me like someone who's calculating the risks rather than someone who's going to say yes just because I'm offering money." He was right. I was calculating. I had a flight booked. I had a credit card. I could walk away from this conversation and figure things out on my own. But I also had a family preparing to challenge my competence in court. I had no allies, no resources, no strategy. And this man, this stranger, was offering me all three in exchange for an evening of performance. "How long?" I asked. "The gala is in 3 weeks. The arrangement could be shorter or longer depending on how things unfold. We'd negotiate terms. And if your brother finds out it's fake—" Then I have worse problems than you can solve." He almost smiled. "But I'm good at keeping secrets, and I suspect you are too." I looked at him, at the controlled grief behind his eyes, the careful way he held himself, the calculation mixed with something that might have been desperation. He needed me, not as a savior, but as a tool, as a means to an end. And I needed him too. "Okay," I said, "I'll do it." His plane was waiting at a private terminal. I had never been on a private jet before, had never even seen one up close, and I stood for a moment on the tarmac looking at the sleek white aircraft with the Hayes Development logo on the tail. "It's more practical than it looks," he said, as if embarrassed. "Fewer delays, more control over the schedule." I wasn't judging. Yes, you were. Most people do. We boarded. The interior was cream-colored leather and polished wood, designed to look like a very expensive living room. A flight attendant offered me champagne. I asked for water instead. Alexander sat across from me, pulled out his tablet, and began working. For the first hour, we didn't speak. Then, somewhere over the Atlantic, he looked up and said, "Tell me more about your family. I need to understand what we're dealing with." So I told him, all of it this time, the grandmother's condo, the inheritance, the pressure to hand over control, the emails Claire had mentioned, the ones my mother was apparently saving as evidence of my instability. "Conservatorship," Alexander said when I finished. "That's a significant threat. They're not just trying to pressure you, they're trying to take legal control of your assets and decisions." "I know. Do you have a lawyer?" "No." "Martin Coleman. I'll call him when we land. He handles my family office work, but he specializes in estates and guardianship disputes. He's seen everything." I nodded, unsure what to say. This was moving fast, faster than I expected, faster than felt real. "Joyce," Alexander's voice softened slightly, "I'm not rescuing you. I want to be clear about that. This is a transaction. I need something from you, you need something from me, but that doesn't mean I won't help. It means the help comes with expectations." "I understand." "Good." He went back to his tablet. I looked out the window at the darkness over the ocean and wondered what I had just agreed to. We landed at Teterboro just after midnight local time. A car was waiting, black, anonymous, the kind of vehicle that could have belonged to anyone wealthy enough to afford private flights. Alexander dropped me at the guest apartment, a one-bedroom unit on the 42nd floor of a building in Midtown, with views of the East River and a kitchen stocked with basics. The keys were already waiting at the front desk. "Get some sleep," he said. "Martin will call you in the morning, and I'll be in touch about the gala." He left without ceremony. I stood alone in the apartment, new, unfamiliar, impossibly clean, and tried to process what had happened. I was home, or somewhere that might become home. I was safe, or at least safer than I'd been yesterday, and tomorrow the work would begin. Martin Coleman called at 9:15 the following morning. His voice was warm and unhurried, the voice of someone who had seen enough crises to know that panic never helped. "Alexander briefed me on your situation," he said. "I'd like to meet with you today if possible. Can you come to my office?" I could. He gave me an address in Midtown, a law firm with a name I recognized from the sides of buildings. I showered, dressed in the only clean clothes I could find in the apartment's closet, a pair of slacks and a blouse that were close enough to my size, and took the subway downtown. Martin Coleman was in his 60s, with white hair and the kind of calm presence that made you want to tell him things. He listened to my story without interrupting, occasionally making notes, occasionally nodding. When I finished, he said, "Your family has made a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" "They've shown their hand too early. The conservatorship threat, the Paris abandonment, these things leave a trail, and trails are evidence." He leaned forward. Tell me about the emails your mother has, the ones she's supposedly using as proof of instability. I described them, 3 or 4 messages written in the months after my divorce, when I was struggling to sleep and couldn't stop crying. I had told my mother I felt lost. I had said I didn't know what to do. I had used the word can't more than once. Normal grief responses, Martin said. Processed through therapy? I saw a counselor for 6 sessions. Good. We can get records, with your consent, showing that you sought help appropriately and were never diagnosed with anything that would impair your judgment. He made another note. What about your finances? Any debt? Any missed payments? No, I've been careful. Savings? Enough to cover a year of expenses if I'm careful. The condo is paid off. Employment history? Administrative coordinator at an events company. I left 3 months ago because I was planning to start something new. What kind of something new? I hesitated. I've been thinking about event planning, launching my own firm. It's still in the idea stage. Martin nodded. That's good. Entrepreneurial ambition suggests forward thinking, not decline. He sat back. Joyce, I'm going to be honest with you. Your family has a weak case, motivated by greed, built on thin evidence, executed badly. But weak cases still cause damage. The process itself is expensive, time-consuming, and humiliating. Even if you win, and you will win, the fight will cost you something. What do you suggest? We build a record, starting now. Every financial decision you make, documented. Every professional engagement, noted. Every interaction with your family, if there are any, captured in writing. He paused. And we find witnesses, people who can speak to your competence, employers, colleagues, anyone who's worked with you and can confirm you're not what your family is claiming. I thought about the events company, about my colleagues there, quiet relationships, professional rather than personal, but real. I can do that, I said. Good. Martin slid a folder across the desk. This is a standard engagement letter. Read it over. If you're comfortable, we can begin today. I read it. I signed it. And just like that, I had a lawyer. The next 3 weeks were the most intense of my life. I worked with Martin's team to gather documentation, bank statements, credit reports, employment records, therapy notes. I contacted former colleagues and asked, awkwardly, if they would be willing to speak on my behalf if needed. Most said yes. A few seemed confused by the request, but agreed anyway. I also worked with Alexander. The gala was approaching, and my role, whatever it was going to be, needed definition. Alexander's assistant, a woman named Helena with a clipboard and 0 tolerance for ambiguity, briefed me on the guest list, the venue, the expected flow of the evening. I learned names. I memorized faces. I studied the foundation's history, Elaine's work, the causes she had supported, the legacy Alexander was trying to protect. You're preparing like you actually care, Helena said one afternoon, watching me take notes on a donor profile. I do care. Why? I looked up. Because this matters to him, and because if I'm going to do something, I want to do it well. She studied me for a moment, then she nodded, a small nod, grudging but real, and moved on to the next topic. A week before the gala, I met Nathan Hayes for the first time. He came to Alexander's office while I was there, reviewing seating charts. He was shorter than his brother, heavier, with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And who is this?" he asked, looking at me like I was furniture that had been moved without permission. "Joyce Romero. She's helping with the foundation work." I didn't know we needed outside help. "We don't, but it's nice to have." Alexander's voice was level, almost pleasant, but I could hear the warning underneath. Nathan turned to me. "How do you know my brother, Joyce?" "We met in Paris. He was kind enough to offer me some work while I'm between projects." "Between projects. How flexible," he smiled. "Well, I look forward to seeing you at the gala. I'm sure you'll make quite an impression." He left without waiting for a response. When he was gone, Alexander exhaled slowly. "He's testing you." "I know. He'll keep testing, at the gala and after. He wants to know if you're someone I'm serious about, and if you are, he'll try to find a way to use that against me." I looked at him. "What do you want me to do?" "Be yourself, be competent, be calm, and don't let him see you flinch." The gala was held at the Metropolitan Club on East 60th Street, a Gilded Age mansion that felt like stepping into another century. Crystal chandeliers, marble columns, women in gowns that cost more than my annual salary had been. I wore a dress that Alexander's assistant had selected for me. Dark blue, simple, elegant without being flashy. I had practiced walking in the heels, I had memorized my talking points, I had done everything I could to prepare. It wasn't enough. Nothing could have prepared me for the way Nathan watched me all evening, the way he introduced me to donors with subtle emphasis on my unclear role, the way he asked, loud enough for others to hear, how long Alexander and I had been seeing each other. But I didn't flinch. I answered his questions with vague politeness. I redirected conversations toward the foundation's work. I smiled when smiling was expected, and stayed silent when silence was more powerful. And at the end of the evening, when Alexander gave his speech about Elaine's legacy and the foundation's future, I stood beside him with my hands clasped quietly in front of me. When he finished, the room applauded. Donors approached with handshakes and promises. Nathan stood near the back of the room, his face unreadable. We had survived the first test. What came next was harder. Nathan didn't stop. He escalated. Within days of the gala, stories began appearing in industry publications, blind items about Alexander's mysterious new companion, speculation about his recovery from grief, suggestions that the foundation was being mismanaged. The smear campaign was subtle enough to seem like journalism, but Martin recognized it immediately. "Someone's feeding them," he said, "probably through a PR firm. Nathan has the money and the motive." What do we do? We don't respond, not directly. Responding gives the story oxygen. He looked at me. What we do is project stability, show that Alexander isn't rattled, and that you aren't either. Project stability. It sounded so simple. It wasn't. 2 weeks after the gala, Alexander came to the guest apartment with a proposal I hadn't expected. "I think we should get married," he said. I stared at him. "What?" "A contract marriage, 1 year. It solves multiple problems at once." He sat down across from me, his voice calm and methodical, as if he were discussing a business merger. "Nathan is building a narrative that I'm unstable, grieving, incapable of commitment. A marriage undermines that narrative completely. And for you, for me, for you it provides legal protection. A spouse can't be compelled to testify against you in certain proceedings. And it makes the conservatorship case even weaker. How can your family argue you're incapable of making decisions if you've just made one of the biggest decisions a person can make?" I processed his words slowly. "You're asking me to marry you for strategic advantage." "Yes, for both of us." "And after a year?" "We dissolve it, amicably. I provide you with a generous settlement. You walk away with resources and connections that could help you build whatever you want to build next." I should have said no. It was absurd. A marriage of convenience, a legal fiction, a performance extended across an entire year. But I thought about my family, about the conservatorship petition that was still looming, even if Martin was confident we could defeat it. And I thought about the fight that was coming, no matter what I did. And I thought about the alternative, facing it alone, with no allies, no resources, no protection. "Okay," I said. We married the following Thursday at City Hall. Alexander wore a gray suit. I wore a cream-colored dress that Helena had selected. There were no guests, no flowers, no celebration. We signed the papers, shook hands with the officiant, and walked out into the afternoon sunlight as husband and wife. It didn't feel like a wedding. It felt like armor. The months that followed were the most productive of my life. With Alexander's connections and Martin's guidance, I began building something real. Not just a defense against my family, though that continued, but a foundation for the future I had been too afraid to imagine. I learned about business formation, corporate structures, contract negotiation, event management on a scale I had never attempted before. I helped Alexander's team with 3 more foundation events: a donors' luncheon, a hospital groundbreaking, a holiday reception, and discovered that I was good at it. Not just the logistics, but the human elements: reading rooms, anticipating problems, making people feel seen. "You have a gift," Helena told me after the holiday reception. "Most people fake interest. You actually listen. I spent years being overlooked. It makes you pay attention to what others miss." Meanwhile, my family made their move. The conservatorship petition arrived in January, a formal legal document claiming that Joyce Romero was incapable of managing her own affairs due to mental incapacity and emotional instability. It cited the emails. It cited my divorce. It cited, absurdly, my sudden and suspicious marriage as evidence of poor judgment. Martin read it with something close to satisfaction. "They've overreached," he said. "The marriage argument undermines their entire case. How can you be incapable of decision-making if you just made a major life decision that requires sound mind? They'll say I was manipulated. They can say whatever they want. We have documentation showing you entered this marriage with full legal counsel, full understanding of the terms, and full agency." He set the petition down. "This is going to court, and when it does, they're going to lose." The hearing was scheduled for March. I spent the weeks before it preparing, not just legally, but emotionally. I knew I would have to face my parents, my sister. I knew they would say things designed to hurt me. I knew I would have to sit there and take it without reacting. Martin coached me. "They want you to break down. They want the judge to see instability. Your job is to be the calmest person in that room." I practiced. I rehearsed. I stared at myself in the mirror and repeated over and over, "I am competent. I am stable. I am in control of my own life." The day before the hearing, my mother called. I don't know how she got my new number. It didn't matter. I answered anyway. Not because I wanted to talk to her, but because I wanted to hear what she would say. "Joyce, please." Her voice was softer than I expected. "This has all gone too far. We never meant for it to get this serious. We were just trying to help." "Help?" "You were struggling, we could see it, and that condo, it's too much responsibility for one person. We thought if we could just manage things for a while, you'd see we were right. You left me stranded in Paris. That was your father's idea. I didn't want to. You took my phone, you canceled my ticket, you walked away while I was standing in an airport with nothing." Silence. "Come home," she said finally. "Sign over management of the condo, not ownership, just management, and we'll drop everything, the petition, all of it. We can go back to being a family." I let her words hang in the air. Then I said, "No. Joyce, I'm not coming home. I'm not signing anything. And if you want to see me, you can see me in court." I hung up. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood-paneled, fluorescent lit, with an American flag in the corner and a judge's bench that looked like it belonged in a school principal's office. My family was already there when I arrived. My father sat at the petitioner's table with their lawyer, a young man in an expensive suit who kept checking his phone. My mother sat behind him. Claire sat in the back row, alone, not looking at anyone. I took my place beside Martin. The judge entered. The proceedings began. Their lawyer presented the case. Emails showing emotional distress, a pattern of withdrawal, a precipitous marriage that suggested impaired judgment. He spoke about the value of the condo and the responsibility of family to protect assets for future generations. Then Martin stood. He presented our documentation, bank statements showing consistent, responsible financial management, employment records, references from former colleagues, notes from my therapist confirming that I had sought help appropriately and showed no signs of incapacity. And then he presented something else. Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence that the petitioner's motivation is not protective but financial. The respondent has records showing that the petitioners canceled her return flight without her knowledge or consent, took her passport and phone, and left her stranded in Paris as part of a deliberate strategy to destabilize her. The judge looked at my parents. Their lawyer objected, but weakly. Martin continued. We have credit card records showing the flight cancellation was made from the petitioner's device. We have embassy records showing the respondent sought emergency assistance. We have documentation of her return to the United States on a private flight after being abandoned. The room went quiet. My mother looked at my father. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. The judge asked if the petitioners wished to respond. Their lawyer said something about miscommunication and family dynamics. It wasn't enough. The judge ruled the following week. Petition dismissed. No grounds for conservatorship. The petitioner's behavior, specifically the Paris incident, suggested that their motivation was asset control rather than genuine concern for my welfare. I was free. But more than that, I had won. After the ruling, Claire sent me an email. Joyce, I know you probably hate me. I hate myself. I should have stopped them. I should have said something. I was scared of being on the outside, but that's not an excuse. I'm so sorry. I read it twice, then I deleted it. I didn't hate her, but I didn't forgive her either. Forgiveness, I had learned, wasn't the same as reconciliation. Some doors once closed were better left that way. Meanwhile, Nathan's challenge had finally come to a head. The Hayes Development Board met in April. Nathan presented his case, concerns about Alexander's judgment, questions about his leadership, suggestions that a change was needed for the good of the company. Alexander presented his own case, audited financials, completed projects, foundation success, the gala's record-breaking donations, and he presented his marriage to me not as sentiment but as evidence of stability. The board voted. Nathan lost by a margin of 7-3. I wasn't there for the vote. I didn't need to be, but Alexander called me that evening and I could hear the relief in his voice. It's over, he said. Congratulations. You helped make it happen. I want you to know that. The year ended in May. We filed the dissolution papers on a Wednesday morning, quiet, efficient, without drama. Martin handled the paperwork. There were no arguments, no negotiations, no surprises. Alexander and I met for coffee the following week to sign the final documents. What will you do now? He asked. Start my business. I have enough capital thanks to our arrangement, and I have the condo. I'm going to turn part of it into an office. Event planning? Event planning. Starting small, building from there. He nodded. You'll be good at it. I know. He smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him since we met. You've changed. I had to. The condo felt different when I returned to it that evening. I had lived there before, after my grandmother's death, after my divorce, but I had never truly occupied it. I had treated it like a waiting room, a place to sit while I figured out what came next. Now it felt like mine. I walked through the rooms slowly, seeing them fresh. The living area, which would become a consultation space, the second bedroom, which would become my office, the view of the city, which would remind me every morning of what I had survived. I had lost a family. I had gained something else, something harder to name. Not wealth, not power, just the certainty that I could take care of myself, that I didn't need anyone's permission to exist. Claire sent one more email 6 months later. I didn't open it. I never would. My parents never contacted me again. I heard through distant channels that their reputation had suffered, the conservatorship filing had become gossip in certain circles, and people had drawn their own conclusions. I didn't celebrate, I didn't gloat, I simply moved on. My event planning firm opened that September. I started with small clients, nonprofits, community organizations, the kinds of events no one else wanted to bother with. I did them well. Word spread. Bigger clients followed. By the following spring, I was turning a profit. By summer, I had my first major corporate contract. I was building something. Not revenge, not triumph, just a life. Solid and quiet, and entirely my own. There's a moment I return to sometimes, standing in the Paris airport watching my family walk away, feeling the floor drop out from under me, believing, for just an instant, that I had nothing left. But I had something, I just didn't know it yet. I had myself, not the self they wanted me to be, dependent, grateful, manageable, the self that had been waiting all along for permission to exist. I gave myself that permission. In the end, that was the only inheritance that mattered. Some people will tell you that family is everything, that blood ties are sacred, that you owe something to the people who raised you no matter what they've done. I believed that once. I don't anymore. What I believe now is simpler. You owe yourself protection. You owe yourself honesty. You owe yourself the courage to walk away from anyone who sees your value as something to extract rather than something to honor. That's not bitterness, it's clarity. And clarity, I've learned, is the beginning of peace. The condo is quiet tonight. I'm sitting by the window, watching the city lights, listening to the distant hum of traffic 42 floors below. Tomorrow, I have a meeting with a new client, a foundation that does work I actually believe in. Next week, I'm hosting my first solo event since the divorce, a launch party for a startup run by women I admire. I don't know where any of it will lead, and for the first time in my life, I'm comfortable with not knowing. I used to think safety meant having people around you, family, partners, allies. I used to think that being alone was the thing to fear. But the truth is different. The truth is that safety comes from within, from knowing who you are, from trusting yourself to make decisions and live with the consequences, from building a life that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. I have that now, and it's enough. So that's my story. Not a story about revenge, not a story about winning, just a story about learning, slowly, painfully, that the people who are supposed to love you don't always have your best interests at heart, and that protecting yourself from them isn't betrayal, it's survival. I used to believe that family meant loyalty without question, that love meant accepting whatever was given to you even when it came wrapped in control and conditions. I thought walking away made you the villain. I don't believe that anymore. Now I believe this. You are allowed to outgrow people who refuse to see you as anything other than what they need you to be. You are allowed to build walls where there used to be open doors. You are allowed to choose peace over performance, even if it costs you relationships you thought would last forever. That's not cruelty, that's clarity. And sometimes clarity is the only inheritance worth keeping. If this story stayed with you, if any part of it felt familiar, I'd be grateful if you hit that subscribe button. Not for the algorithm, for the reminder that you're not alone in what you've been through. Leave a comment and tell me, what moment in your life taught you that protecting yourself wasn't selfish? I read every single one. And if you haven't already, check out the next story on your screen. It might be exactly what you need to hear today. Until next time, take care of yourself. No one else is obligated to.